Okay.
And I've been here since 10 o'clock.
But I'm willing to
Us
ever
too.
go before I go. But I
At
can't say
this
I
point,
have
we're
to
just
go home.
switching people rather than delaying everybody else.
And you have switched once already generously.
Well, yeah, I have to go home for this,
Okay.
same reason. I have kids, so gotta
So
go.
this is Elizabeth Richter.
Right. Good evening.
And then, I'm sorry, James LaGuardia, and then Linda DiMorale, and then Marissa Ringel.
You guys have my testimony, I believe, in front of you? Right.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I wrote a lot of things down, and I know since it's in my testimony, I probably don't have to just read it straight off. And I must say, just sitting here listening to a lot of the testimony, I felt that I needed to comment just right from the beginning. 35 years ago, I had a very severe anxiety attack, which was misunderstood, and I ended up being misdiagnosed and hospitalized at McLean Hospital in Boston with a very serious diagnosis. I ended up staying there for 2 years with this diagnosis, and then they figured out that it was a misdiagnosis and they had made a mistake. Since that time, having walked the walk and been with people, lived with people essentially who have mental illness, I am a part of that community. And certainly I suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from being in that situation, and I've had counseling for that purpose to deal with that. And as a result, when I hear a lot of talk about, well, this is a mental illness, and that person is just sick, that mentally ill, I find that somewhat offensive, because people with mental illness are good people, just the same as any other community. And you always have the bad eggs in any community. You can have homosexuals who have criminals in their midst. You can have, what shall I say? You can have African Americans with criminals in their midst. You can have Asian people. In any group, you're going to find those people who make you feel terribly, terribly embarrassed and ashamed that you are part of that group. But it is not fair during this hearing to point out and state that every person who decided to be bad and to commit wrongdoing must definitely have some kind of mental illness, because there are many people who choose to be evil and to do harmful things, and they're perfectly sane when they make that decision to do it. And there is parental alienation. And there are many people who are committing that parental alienation knowing the harm that they're doing. They are not mentally ill. They have made a choice about how they're going to run their lives and the lives of their children. Okay, so I do have a problem with family court, just as a whole, demonizing people who have mental illnesses, denying them their constitutional rights and rights to due process based upon the fact that they have a mental illness. This is wrong. It is not fair to say that somebody who has a mental illness should be denied access to their children, that they should be denied their right to be a father or mother simply because they have some form of mental health disability. My mother had a mental health disability. I have tremendous admiration for my mother. I just wanted to make that point, that you can't just dismiss people and harm them because you decide that they have a mental health disability. And I can't say how many people that I've seen in court and I've observed where the judge has simply said, you have a mental health disability, and of course there's been no evidence, no documentary evidence presented to the court, no testimony that this person has a mental illness, but the judge decides this person has a mental illness, so I'm denying you access as a mother or father to your children. This happens frequently, and it is
Thank you, Ms.
absolutely
Richter.
awful.
Could you just
So-
wrap up if there are questions
Okay,
people
well,
can ask them?
you have my story in here, and my basic story is that I believe that I was discriminated against in the Connecticut family court system because of the fact that I have this 35-year-old ancient history, and that people didn't understand it, and that they didn't take the time to understand it, and that if you had gone, or anybody in my case had gone to McLean and spoken to some of those people there who know me because they are still there, the people that knew me then, and when I was a patient, they treated me then. They're still there. If anyone wanted information on whether my mental health was solid or not, to be a parent, they could have just picked up the phone and called those people there. And I have so much documentary evidence about my mental health. It is unbelievable. I've got a whole stack, all of which states that that 35-year-old incident was a misdiagnosis. It was a mistake. And every document and every evaluation I've had since then has stated that also. And yet, during my time in family court, which added up to 6 years, I was repeatedly discriminated against because of that history. And I suffered greatly. My family suffered greatly.
Ms. Richter, Dr.
And I
Thayer,
just wanted you to know that. And please read my testimony.
Dr.
And you'll get the
Thayer,
details.
Dr. Thayer has a question, and then Mr. Weissmuller.
I
Yeah.
sort of have a question. Thank you so much for bringing attention to this issue. As I believe what you're talking about is the stigma of mental illness.
Right.
And that was my question, so now I'm going to get to say something more. I want to make everybody aware, too, that on March 7th in the Connecticut Forum, Andrew Solomon is coming to talk about this issue. So it's a wonderful forum to be able to talk about the stigma of mental illness. Mm-hmm. And you're absolutely right. There are gradations of mental illness. We're all in that, at least a couple of us here are in that business of helping people with mental illness, and certainly we would be out of business and we didn't believe that people could
Right.
get better, and
Right.
and that people need to be very careful about determining parenting plans and parenting access with people who have
Right.
been diagnosed with mental illness.
Absolutely. There is no reason to state, or for any GAL to state or to imply in any way, that if a person has a diagnosis and they're in treatment and they are working to recover, that somehow they should be denied access to their children. And we had Donna here, who was repeatedly given false mental health diagnoses, and that was done in order to prevent her from obtaining access to her children. I can just go from person to person where they have been labeled falsely and then denied the opportunity to share a relationship with their children. This is disgraceful.
So
Thank you.
I think even more, and I just want to comment on what you just said. You said that if someone's in treatment, but I think people can have a diagnosis and not be in treatment and still have relationships with their children.
I
I don't think
absolutely agree.
I don't
I'm
think it has to
trying to-
be as extreme as you put it, that someone has to be in treatment. Some people, you know, you
agree.
can have a mental illness and not be a risk to your children.
You
so.
know, I'm trying to acknowledge that that you are people who are in authority and in power and may not have arrived at such enlightenment. But since you've already arrived at that place, congratulations. And I actually
Thank
agree
you.
with that too.
I don't know that we would call it enlightenment, but I do recognize that, you know, what I talk about is minimally adequate parenting, so
Right.
frankly. And Mr. Westmill, you had a question.
Yeah, and I hope you can help me out with this. I'm going to relate this to a domestic violence situation only for a matter of procedure. If there's an allegation of domestic violence, someone can go in and get an immediate relief, and they can say that the parenting plan should be on hold for a period of time, and usually it's only going to be 2 weeks or so before that allegation is explored. And then there's going to be some evidentiary finding to continue the separation of the parent with the child, or maybe there'll be a continuation, but there should be some access. What I've heard today in a lot of testimony, and I'm gathering you've experienced this, is that when there's an allegation of a mental health issue, that you're not experiencing that. There's not a quick hearing where you have the opportunity to have an evidentiary finding and then allow continued parenting while perhaps something else is explored, or else it's just dismissed. Mm-hmm. The gentleman just right before you talked about 5 years, basically no access, and 1.5 years of that, if I understood him correctly, he's waiting for a mental health evaluation that came back positive, and he still didn't get to see his kids. And so if you could enlighten us a little bit on how that worked for you, and what procedure might help, if maybe perhaps the domestic violence temporary order and method, the protocol might be implemented, or if there's a special rule that we should recommend.
Unfortunately, one of the things about the mental health profession is the way it can kind of be used in a slime ball kind of way, and how it can be used to kind of just, kind of dirty people's reputations. So one of the things that happened with me is I had ultimately 3 psychologists who evaluated me, a psychiatrist and a licensed practical counselor, and in addition, the custody evaluator, all of whom scrutinized me in great detail. And yet the guardian ad litem was never convinced that I wasn't mentally ill. And basically, I think the attorneys in my case really never stopped believing that because of that old incident of 35 years in the past, that there must be something the matter with me. I think that was always a factor and continued being a factor for a number of years in my case. So, it's a horribly damaging thing when people start to pull out labels. It just dirties the water, it muddies the water, it makes it very hard to ever get yourself clean, to be honest. I still feel dirty from the first days when this was brought out as an accusation against me, that I was mentally ill. I don't know what can be done about that. Even when you do evaluations, they are not absolutely exact. I think maybe Dr. Horowitz might want to make a comment about that. You don't have absolute certitude with these evaluations that you do. I bottom line believe that people's behavior counts. What are people doing? Seriously, what are they doing? People forget all the vague stuff about, well, she appears to be sort of narcissistic or any of that stuff, which is, and as far as I'm concerned, fairly airy-fairy. What really counts is, are you feeding your child 3 meals a day? Are you putting them to bed at night? Are you getting them on the bus? Are they safe in your car? Are you a driver that is safe in your car so you're not having multiple accidents? Are you paying your bills? Are you bringing the child to his or her activities? Those are the things that you want to look at, rather than focusing in on these abstract ideas about, well, this person seems to lack empathy. What does that mean if the father and mother took the child, picked him up on time, took him in the car to the baseball game, stood on the sidelines, cheered the whole way through the game, picked up the kid and took him out for ice cream after and took him home? Who cares if they have empathy if the kid had a great time, right? I mean, that's my opinion. So, that's what it's all about, is people being sensible. And also it has to do with people being humane and also understanding. You're often going to get parents who, like, Sue, you mentioned, who may just be a little offbeat. It's okay to be offbeat. And offbeat parents, are actually cool too sometimes. They just are. My mother just did not have friends. She lived her whole life without friends. And I could go into the fact that I had a little brother who died very young of a brain tumor, and she became very embittered. And so she just decided she didn't like people anymore, but she loved her children. And, she's now, she has Alzheimer's. And I want to tell you how I miss those conversations we used to have. Okay, so she wasn't a perfect parent.
And you survived.
I am here today, and I'm speaking
Right.
to you because she was a very strong individual. She was as tough as nails. And, whenever I get scared about coming in front of a task force like this and speaking, I look back to my mother and I say, look how she withstood so much in her own life. And she was not a perfect person. I had many complaints over the years. I was, a very disruptive teenager. But I don't think there would have been any justification, despite her diagnosis, which I'm sure was pretty bad. There was no reason to deny her access to me as my mother. And I think we have to have compassion for people who are different. And if there's one thing, I would hope that this is something that the Connecticut judicial branch works on. You cannot regulate this. You can't get a statute to demand that people are compassionate. But I think that if the judicial branch in its work in terms of the ADA, which there are ongoing meetings and committee meetings about the ADA, and as the judicial branch goes about its work, as it considers more deeply what it means to be a human being and how to be compassionate to the broad range of individuals who are out there, I just think it's better for all of us.
Thank you.
So-
I think Ms. Veronal has a question for you.
Oh, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Just a couple of things. When I participated in the guardian ad litem training, they talked a lot about, not a lot, but they mentioned being biased with parents and everything. That was one thing that was mentioned, and I found it really ironic because I was taking the little shuttle bus over, and there was a very active GAL AMC in the system. We started talking, and it came up about this bias. She goes, I don't even know why they're even teaching this. We're not biased. We wouldn't be in this position if we weren't biased. All of us have some degree of biases. So I do think that people do judge and they're biased. The other thing is, whether it's mental illness or anything else, parents just, they just need to be good enough. Like you said, you mentioned all those things. And I think when you get caught up in the system, that maybe some people think it's their job to really dissect every little thing like they're doing a research project. And then it sounds like on some other situations, you have other ones that don't do anything to prevent some stuff. So hopefully with all this testimony, there'll be some changes.
Yes, well, I think the real concern is when you take things that happen that are relatively minor. I had a situation at the beginning of my case where I had gone a couple days to Barnes & Noble to sit with my papers, my court papers, and that got translated into all sorts of fabulous, I neglected my children by leaving them alone in the evening and blah, 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 blah. And it was a constant theme throughout the period when my custody was under consideration. And I ended up, as a result of this big hoopla over having gone to Barnes & Noble a couple times at the beginning of my divorce, I was not allowed to have babysitters. In my parenting agreement, it states that I'm not allowed to have babysitters for anything longer than 30 minutes once a week. So if I wanted to get a job, I would not really be able to do that because I was only allowed to have childcare for 30 minutes once a week. So, when you end up with that kind of absurdity, over some, confabulated, minor event that takes on a life of its own, so many people are suffering from that kind of thing. And I think that's just, it's very regrettable because people are being seriously harmed over what are relatively minor things.
Thank you.
When it
Thank you
gets
very
down to-
much.
Yeah.
Who do we have next? James LaGuardia. And again, my apologies. Yeah, I probably can't say that either if I read it. And then Linda DiMorale, and then Marissa Ringel, and then Paul Greenan. Thank you, sir.